2022 is the year of the battery. We only had a few battery SPACs and IPOs the last 18 months or so. This coming year, we're going to see a lot, and 24M may be one of them.
Welcome back to Rockstock Channel, and thanks for checking in. Before we launch into the interview, we'd like to thank all our Patreon sponsors. And for those of you who are new, share a bit about us. RK Equity is an advisory firm run by Rodney Hooper and me, Howard Klein. We are exclusively focused on raising awareness about companies producing or developing the next generation critical raw materials that are powering Tesla's EV battery energy transition. Please register your email at rkequity.com and follow Rodney and me on LinkedIn and Twitter. Please also subscribe to this channel, Rockstock Channel, on YouTube, as well as Lithium Ion Rocks on SoundCloud for our podcasts. Please note, Rodney and me are not financial advisors or broker-dealers. Nothing you hear in this video is investment advice. Please do your own research and read the disclaimer at the end of this video or on our website. Thanks again for the support, and let's get into the video. Welcome back to Rockstock Channel. It is Wednesday, December 15th. We are privileged here to be speaking with Steve LeVine, who is a reporter and has recently launched a newsletter called The Electric.
The Electric is a standalone business under the umbrella of The Information. It's owned by The Information, a tech website. They've been around since 2013, and it's a technology version of Politico, a premium publication that covers batteries and electric vehicles and the mobility space at large for people with skin in the game. A newsletter every Sunday at 5 p.m. I do flash analyses during the week as warranted, and a monthly podcast. I'm the author of 3 books, spent the last 10 years being immersed in a technology, batteries, that have become a mania.
You say the batteries, I tweeted, it's the battery stupid, referencing Ford and Jim Farley, who I think he won an award as the Motor Trend, Person of the Year, but, more relevantly or more prominently, Elon Musk is on the cover of Time magazine. You have written in a recent note that you believe like next year is going to be kind of like the year of the battery, as opposed to just the year of the EV with a number of the spin-offs. So what do you think of, Elon Musk on the cover of Time and your most recent article talking about SPACs and next year, your view on the battery, the year of the battery IPO with LG, SK, maybe GM, Ford, etc.
All of these EV makers, from Tesla to Volkswagen, everyone is relying on China's supply chain to make their businesses go. And the last time I checked, China is the United States' greatest technological rival. We're all familiar in 2010 when push came to shove, China, which controls 98% of the global rare earths supply, cut off the supply. You mentioned Jim Farley and Ford. I'm an ambivalent fan of Ford. I think that they've done. Jim Farley has changed Ford's approach to electric cars from being slow and ho hum to going full bore. What makes me less convinced is they're explicitly relying. I had their head of EVs on my podcast, and they're relying explicitly on their icons, the Mustang, the F-150, to be the vanguard of their EV strategy. That's good, and they've got a lot of orders for these vehicles, but it's thin. So what's next? Do you mean that Jim, do you mean to say that all you're going to do is to electrify your icons and that's your whole strategy? You say you're going to be selling 1 million EVs by 2030. Are you saying that the Mustang and the F-150 Lightning are going to sell. So it's yeah, you can sell the F-150 is for 40 years has been the leading vehicle sold in the United States. So yes, that's a winning strategy. But then what? And so I haven't seen that. And also, they're out of batteries. They've got all these orders. Jim, where will you get your batteries? And we've seen nothing. I've asked his people. I asked his head of EVs. What about your supply chain? They don't have a strategy. Their videos are online. You can listen to their supply chain folks. They're worried. They don't understand the supply chain, and that's already come back to bite Ford. And the one company that's of the majors that you can see over the last week understands this, and you mentioned this, Volkswagen. Volkswagen, since last Friday, has come out with a string of announcements that make clear that they get it. They get the supply chain problem. They announced this deal with Umicore. We're going to make cathodes, Northvolt and Galp, but Volkswagen has got a big share of Northvolt and takes half of Northvolt's output.
Do you think that that is a Volkswagen directed strategy, that Volkswagen does not want directly to get in the, let's say, lithium hydroxide business? Because Tesla announced during Battery Day that they are getting into the lithium hydroxide business directly in Texas. So do you think Northvolt is just acting as part of that Volkswagen strategy?
It's effectively acting. I don't know that Volkswagen told Northvolt, but probably Northvolt is selling most of its stuff to Volkswagen. Volkswagen made clear last week that it understands the supply chain. But I want to respond to what you said about Tesla. So 16 months ago, September 22nd, 2020, Battery Day. Among the announcements by Musk, by Drew Baglino, we're going to get into the nickel processing business and the lithium processing business. But I haven't heard a word since then about, and I'm trying to track this. Maybe have they in fact installed those plants were supposed to be installed as part of the Austin Gigafactory, and maybe they're doing it. Probably they're doing it, but I'm trying to track evidence that they are. I'm not finding it.
We have some idea, we really can't say. So we're surprised, to be honest, that post Battery Day, that there weren't more announcements like the one that you just said on Northvolt and Galp. We've been following that very closely. We have been surprised, rather, and you didn't mention this, and I'd appreciate your view, because you're saying you think Northvolt's acting on behalf of Volkswagen, and that is a hard rock spodumene to hydroxide strategy. But where Volkswagen and Umicore have put their public name has been to a geothermal brine company, in Germany, Vulcan Energy, as has Stellantis, as has Renault, but there's no money put up, right? They're just announcing public offtakes. But in this case, Northvolt and Galp are saying, we are going to commit, what was it, 800 or 900 million US dollars, okay, to build a 35,000 ton hydroxide plant, albeit they haven't secured the mineral, the spodumene mine. They say, here's a plan, right? So it seems not 100% baked, but why isn't Volkswagen putting their name to that, right? But they are putting their name to geothermal brine, which is still an unproven technology. far further into the future, in our opinion, than more conventional technologies. We have some suspicions as to, why they're doing that. GM has done the same. There's a lot of interest in the Department of Energy in the United States in geothermal, and GM, in our opinion, is a bit of a political animal. They invested millions, of dollars, in an R&D with controlled thermal in the Salton Sea, but much more conventional advanced projects, in hard rock they haven't done. However, you mentioned rare earths. GM did hit the bid with MP Materials.
The upstream is the key to the electrification. As we go through this transformation, there's a lot of industry of the supply chain that needs to change. And when you look upstream, there just isn't enough stuff for everybody to compete. And so we think that the electrification race is going to be won upstream. And today was obviously a transformational event for MP Materials. A lot of the credit really goes to GM for having the confidence in us, the commitment to see what is really happening out there in the landscape, and wanting to be one of the leaders in going upstream in this space. A great partnership. It'll be great for GM. It'll be great for the country. We're going to get this supply chain home. As you know, about 90% of this supply chain is in China. It's a single point of failure for the industry. And the downstream is realizing that this needs to change. And so we're leading the way on that front in our area. The private sector needs to solve this problem. There's a lot of capital available downstream. And so I think what you're going to see is that the first movers like GM today are going to be the ones who are able to produce 3, 5, 7 years out. And so I think when you look at the street numbers for electric vehicles, what you're going to see across a lot of these commodities, and whether it's semiconductors or different pieces of the upstream, there's just not going to be enough for everybody. This is a race, and today was a key first shot.
When you talk about Jim Farley, not fully getting it, they have their plans, with Blue Oval SK, with major, where are the batteries? Well, $11.4 billion, and I think 2 or 3 battery plants in Kentucky and Tennessee.
Jim Farley, you've got an exciting announcement, $11.4 billion, 11,000 jobs in Kentucky and Tennessee.
We're going to have a whole line of battery electric vehicles. The F-150 Lightning is completely sold out, and that really informed our thinking. These 3 battery plants, 1 in Tennessee, 2 in Kentucky, plus the assembly plant, is really going to change the game for Ford. These battery plants will allow us to produce 1 million vehicles worth of batteries per year. It's 6 miles. It's the largest facility we've ever built. Building batteries and building battery electric vehicles is totally different than what we've been doing the last 118 years. This will be a carbon neutral site. We're going to use geothermal to power it. We're going to have zero landfill, totally recycle water. It's our commitment far beyond the tailpipe emissions to go green.
You also talk about SK and LG and the spinoff of their IPOs. I think what you're going to see next year is that these guys, I'm calling it Fordlandia again, right? They're going to have to own mines and processing. So maybe you'll see, you say Volkswagen's kind of at the forefront, maybe so. They're using, Northvolt in the case of this hydroxide. But, might you see Ford, SK, LG in America or Canada or Europe start writing checks, to go all the way upstream, just like Ford bought rubber plantations and iron mines in the 20s and 30s.
GM and Ford right now, they are relying completely. They're trying to keep an arm's length distance from mining, from processing. They want LG and SK, they want their tier 1 suppliers to carry this out, but they're not going to be able to, they aren't going to, that's not sustainable. So they have to and will get into the mining business and especially into the processing business.
If I can ask you then, so here's the practical reality. You can build, if you get permitting in China, you can have a chemical conversion plant constructed in a year, and you can do it for $5,000 or $6,000 a ton, capex. In the US, it takes however long it takes to get permitted, if you can get it through, and then it costs $20,000 to $25,000 a ton, possibly 25 to 30. And then there's operating costs, and there's all sorts of procedures in terms of environmentals, the standards, etc. So simply put, to run the same plant takes a lot longer to construct and permit, and then once you're in operation, you don't make the same margins. So who should bear that cost in the process?
In short, what do the US and Europe do to make their supply chains, their regionalization of the supply chains go? One of the pathways I wrote about last week, and that's the ESG, right? So the Monroney sticker, you make it required that vehicles, EVs sold in Europe and the United States, have to adhere to certain to ESG requirements. How are they environmentally produced, labor, and all of that. Another pathway that I've been talking about with some startups is processes, so next generation processes that don't require the whole first sulfates and then moving on to the precursors and then the CAM. I know that you know of the same startups that I'm looking at, including Nano One, North America, because Nano One is Canadian, and Europe go for a leapfrogging of the Chinese processing approach. The economics of the metal precursors would be much less, and would compete.
Obviously, there's a lot of slip between cup and lip, and the theory's good there. So obviously we're all rooting for that, but again, at lab scale to commercial scale, there are lots of things that have to happen, and capital plowed into the existing processes. So
yes,
you're right, it is going to be difficult. But then if I could just touch on another thing. So again, we may have differing views, but let's look at, say, LFP as the way, the truth, and the light of making cheap EVs. Commercially, people say a lot of things, but no one has shown me that they can economically recycle LFP cells outside of China, given the low value of the content. Whereas if you look at the full cycle and the high nickel, you often get your money back on that side. So my question is, for example, a lot of these LFP battery Teslas that are being exported out of China into Europe, who is responsible, or who should be responsible for the guaranteeing of the recycling of that material when it comes to end of life? If it can't be done commercially, is someone responsible to ship it back to China? Because there's a lot of landfills that says they don't even recycle themselves. Who should be responsible for that? If that's the cheaper route up front, who's responsible for the back end?
LFP is the million-mile battery. So LFP, you can cycle again and again and again, thousands of times. No one even knows what the end point is, how much LFP can be cycled in an EV or in stationary storage before it goes to 80% capacity, which is the point at which, just for your listeners, that's when the battery is considered dead. And so it misunderstands LFP and recycling. LFP is why the recycling business is not the business that people think it is. It's buzzy. It should not be buzzy. And so if you've got vehicles that can go 750,000 miles, which is what BYD advertises its Blade battery at, or the Million Mile Battery, Jeff Dawn, the battery researcher at Dalhousie University, is up to 2.5 million miles on his test batteries, and so that's broadening what I'm talking about. He's cycling single crystal NMC, and so the batteries that we're talking about that are going to come on the market this decade, starting in the mid-decade and going on from there, are going to last a very long time. The question is, what happens to the batteries after, if I drive my vehicle with either NMC single crystal 811 or LFP, what happens after I go 10 years, however long, we're going to drive our cars? Then what do we do with that battery? So like, will I own the battery and I'm going to take it to my next EV? Like, businesses are going to arise that we're not even thinking of what to do with that battery next. The car makers themselves have to think about this. This is part of the economics that can vastly alter the economics of EVs. It is like indisputable, like just as a baseline of what I'm talking about, batteries are going to last a lot longer than is currently assumed. And the recycling business, unless you're doing what Redwood Materials is doing, is changing, it's doing recycling, but it's entered materials processing, buying raw materials and producing CAM. That, like, the afterlife of LFP, we're talking, if the average car is driven 13,000 miles, we're talking 75 years. So the recycling, this is an issue for the next century, not this century.
We believe that Redwood and Rivian, and Ford and SK are going to be natural partners, like Northvolt, in the processing, and possibly even the mining, right? When we think about brand names that might be attached to, North American lithium companies, for example, we think Redwood is as or more important, than Tesla might be.
Yeah, we're on the same page. It's not enough of a business to recycle the scrap from the current battery companies and to recycle electronic devices.
Okay, look, we're believers in recycling, but not for, we think it's a 2030, 2040 thing. So we agree with you that, recycling and DLE lithium, have become the two super hot themes, because they're perceived, I think they're politically perceived as just like more sustainable. Like, every time you hear a politician talk about, raw materials, they immediately say, no, recycling, right? Like, well, okay, but there's not enough batteries out there to recycle, but recycling is just very politically correct. I want to switch a little bit, because you mentioned this report of the companies. One company which we represent, which caught our attention, is Freyr. You gave as a good bet, and I see that you have interviewed the 24M technology people, on your webinars. So what do you know of Freyr and 24M? And if you could talk about that, but then also I want to delve a little bit into your LFP enthusiasm, because Freyr is currently focused on ESS, energy storage, which by definition is likely to be LFP. But LFP is perceived to be a Chinese technology. It's going off patent or whatever. There could be Americans and Europeans who battery companies that make it here in the U.S. But your reporting has been like they've been very quiet about that. So if you could talk about those two things, 24M and Freyr, the LFP angle.
24M is a battery. It's a technology battery company. I first wrote about them, I think it's like 2014 or 2015, somewhere around there. They reinvented. If we were starting from scratch, remember the way that lithium-ion batteries are made now is that when the first commercial lithium-ion battery, 1991, Sony, they simply looked around in the company, in the factory, well, how are we going to make these batteries? And cassette tapes were going out, going out of style. And they simply took those, hey, this is a strip, it's coded, right? They simply took the machines, the roll-to-roll machines that made magnetic recording tape, and turned them into machines that made now roll-to-roll cathodes and roll-to-roll anodes for batteries. And that's what's made today. That's the, and so 24M's question mark was, if you were starting today, how would you make the battery? How would you make it? And that's what they've produced. And it cuts down so many steps in the processing of the battery. And it's not roll to roll, it's a stamping thing, and it's a semi-solid, and so it's an economic play, but it requires someone to discard all the current stuff that they've got in the factory and install something new. No one wanted to do it. They couldn't sell this thing. They went around the world. They got a Thailand company to go along with them. They got one of the smaller Japanese company to go along, but they couldn't get anyone in Europe, couldn't get anyone in the United States. Finally, Freyr has embraced them. My whole take on Freyr is Freyr understood, my God, this is a terrific technology. We're going to build our strategy around it. We're going to get a semi-exclusive deal with 24M for Europe, and now they've gotten one for the United States. And I think it's kind of crazy, but they were smart enough to realize, just because something has been overlooked a lot of times, it doesn't mean that it's a bad product. And so hats off to Freyr, and I think 24M, it will go public, at some point, maybe soon. I do think 2022 is the year of the battery. We only had a few battery SPACs and IPOs the last 18 months or so. This coming year, we're going to see a lot, and 24M may be one of them.
They might, but 24M's been, prior to that, they just received an investment from Volkswagen. So Volkswagen, has invested in QuantumScape. They've invested in China, in Goshen, and Freyr and Coke are investing in a joint venture, with 24M as well. So the whole thesis, again, we've been involved from the beginning, with Freyr and the elusive SPAC, but the whole thesis, to your point, is that it's reducing the manufacturing steps from like 15 steps to 5 steps. If you go back to Tesla's battery day, that's everything he kind of talks about. Go back to first principles, and how do you take processes out of the manufacturing of this. So what was relevant, you made some kind of comment that there's some risk to Freyr because Volkswagen did a deal direct with Freyr, but a knock on Freyr or 24M was that this is only an energy storage technology. It's not good for EV. So the fact that Volkswagen is investing in 24M seems to validate the thesis that it is good for EV. And another good thing about the licensing agreements with 24M that not everybody understands, they have like an in-licensing. So you mentioned that Thai company, you mentioned the Japanese company, you mentioned Freyr. They're all now commercializing this 10-year in the making MIT technology of 24M, but they all share information of their experience. So Volkswagen sharing their experience on EV for 24M is going to benefit Freyr who then could use the 24M technology with another automaker like BMW or Mercedes, right? So it's not, I don't think it's so much a risk to Freyr that all the battery companies bring 24M in-house. I think they're all starved for batteries, as you suggested. Jim Farley's starved, but if this proves to be a good, cheaper, more sustainable technology, especially in Freyr's case, they're manufacturing it in hydropowered Norway, et cetera, it will enable other EV players to kind of look at it. Actually, Freyr as a stock, you talk about it, it's funny because everyone hates mining and metals. Everyone loves, you know, the end product, you know, the Lucid or the Tesla, whatever. Battery companies are not so well loved, you know, either. And energy storage is not as sexy as a sexy EV. So Freyr stock is you know, has done okay, but it didn't have like a QuantumScape like, you know, aura around it. Do you see more battery manufacturing for LFP? Because everything we're seeing, again, going back to Northvolt and Galp, it's hydroxide focused. You know, Volkswagen Umicore was 811, you know, high nickel focused. You know, the Mustang you mentioned and the F-150, the Hummer, you know, the Ultiums, these are all high nickel based. You know, we think, you know, America and Europe is mostly going to be that. And we also don't think, you alluded to something, but you didn't say it specifically, the ESG factor, there might be carbon border adjustment mechanisms to level the playing field. I think it's untenable, you know, for, you know, Tesla to be, you know, exporting whole cars, you know, with LFP from China indefinitely to compete against Volkswagen Golfs, right? There has to be a tax adjustment for that. I also don't think it's super sustainable if, you know, you're exporting very heavy LFP batteries from CATL from China to be inserted into American or European vehicles. So we haven't heard, you know, Tesla say in Germany and in Texas that they're going to be making LFP batteries. Do you see LFP being manufactured, you know, at scale? Because you're very bullish, you know, that the forecasts are underestimating it. To me, if you're right, you're going to have to. It can't just be manufactured, you know, in China. And you know, CATL is building a factory. I mean, in Europe, do you think that they'd be welcomed building factories here, or will other people be building LFP batteries, non-Chinese, you know, in America?
Indisputably, again, LFP will be manufactured in the United States, and it will be, you know, at scale in Europe too. It has to be for the reasons you just stated. Musk has said that 75% of Tesla's vehicles will use LFP. So, and he's not going to import, just the same economics. But how do you make LFP? You know, the point Rodney made. How do you make LFP competitive with what the Chinese can deliver it at? And that's where these processing plays will come into the picture. Like the U.S. needs to leapfrog the Chinese methods of producing LFP, and then they can happen here